Hi, today we're going to talk about contract automation. So let let's set the stage real quick. Contract automation and the processing of like agreements and complex documents like contracts today exists in various forms of technology. Most of the time, you will have, uh, for example, maybe a contract system, and that could be um where all the agreements go. They're stored in a database. Um, so that so that contract system would be where the users have to go to access the content and deal with any sort of terms and conditions that would relate to any particular entity mentioned in the contract. Not the best, but at least it's all in one place. But that's today. Other systems and other organizations might have a system called Enterprise Content Management. We'll call that ECM. And in an ECM system, this is far more a generic workflow and document management system. And what you find in an ECM system really are just kind of electronic file cabinet with workflow, records management, and a lot of the base functionality to deal with electronic records. However, in these two systems, when it comes to dealing with contracts in particular, there's a lot of instances, and really where this video was inspired was a use case where contracts and lease agreements were frequently referenced in order to determine and like next best action, because there were entities that were involved and properties that were involved, and so it was important for the the contents or the specific T's and C's of that document to be at the hands of the expert, which, by the way, would have to go in and access from this system, or in some cases, this system, to pull the document back. But here's the thing, they had to read this with their own eyes and take the time to digest where in the contract they needed to focus their reading to extract the key information they needed to make a decision. Well, in our video today, we're going to talk about a new paradigm, and that is really automated contract processing. And this is a paradigm that fits really any sort of complex document. So whether it's a lease agreement or some sort of terms and conditions between either multiple parties or just a simple two-party system, you really need to have this information when it hits the door. You need to understand what's in it. It's beneficial to have these types of insights because it speeds the process along. But with the tools of today, they really require the subject matter expert to constantly dig into the document in order to get that information. In this new paradigm, we're going to talk about how we can automate that and use AI in the process to help the subject matter expert be more efficient. Now, there's a term today called agentic. You may read this term and correlate it to a type of AI bot or virtual assistant, but essentially, the term agentic is really referring to some sort of conversational interface that allows the understanding and reasoning of complex problems in order to carry out a task or multiple tasks. And the ability for AI to reason through complex type tasks really kind of has been something that has come of late because we have systems now that have multiple agents. So you have bots for certain types of tasks. That's all they do. And now you have this new kind of virtual assistant that sits on top of those other bots to sort of coordinate or orchestrate those activities. Because many of the things that we want to automate in business are more complex than just a simple single transaction, right? Doing a lookup in a ticketing system to find the status of a ticket. While that's something a bot can do today, we certainly want to do more than that when we apply AI to something that is that's tied to as much value as these complex documents and contracts in particular. So, what you will see with the enterprise content management system or the contracting system is we have some new roles or new players in this picture. So at the foundation of virtually any sort of enhancement or automation today is our good friend generative AI. So the AI or the large language model or the traditional AI has power today to really decipher and go multimodal from image recognition, image generation, audio understanding, and definitely free-flowing text understanding and text generation. And that's the piece that we will use from AI in this particular scenario. The other thing that's at play here is an orchestrator or an orchestration hub. So we're going to just call this the hub. So when you have, and as I mentioned before, the agentic concept, you have lots of different bots and lots of different what we'll call skills that sit inside or are controlled by the hub. And one of the primary skills is the ability for the hub to leverage AI when it makes sense. So in this scenario, what we're going to see is a flow that allows you to leverage generative AI and traditional AI throughout the process to make it more efficient. So we'll grab our contracts. As they hit the door, they'll either be still stored into our contract system or into the ECM system. And what we'll find is that as these documents arrive, we'll have a triggering event that will put our documents into our vector store. Now, the vector store has a purpose. And in this scenario, it will contain all the metadata about the documents, but also all the contents of those documents. And the metadata that we will create will be helpful in determining elements of the contract, because we'll have a model that when the documents are ingested, so we're just going to put this model here. Okay. And then we'll put this model here. And with these models, we're going to break up the documents and we're going to create metadata so that they can be stored neatly in our vector store. So today, you can see in the blue, we have places for these documents to reside. That doesn't change. What does change is now these documents are being siphoned off, and the contents of those documents are being processed so that they can be searchable and usable from our hub. So once the documents are in the hub, by the way, our hub also has a skill to retrieve from the vector store. So in this process, we've now been able to wire up all the contents of where our essential agreements reside today. So minimal impact. We have a crawler, this little crawler, that will go out and grab all of those agreements. And sometimes the agreements are in contract systems, they're actually stored as blobs in a database. So the crawler actually has to open the database, pull that blob column out, that field out, and process it that way. So once we get that content, we run it through our model to create the necessary metadata relating to things like what's a force majeure clause? What are the terms of cancellation? Those types of contract sections that are fairly common, the model's going to identify that, and it's going to place some metadata around that text so that when we, from our hub, want to pull back specific sections of that contract, that metadata helps us pull it back much more efficiently. Because remember, when it comes to contracts, you really can't do a word find or a word search. That doesn't work because it's the context of the phrase or the context of the clause in that particular agreement that makes all the difference. And those clauses and phrases have lots of different disparate words in them to describe or attain the same meaning. So having even a semantic search oftentimes will leave you without being able to locate certain things. So what you need in these models are contract-trained traditional AI type models. Or you could also use generative AI to identify those things as well. But either way, we need a model to create some metadata before that content goes into the vector store. Now, once it's in the vector store, we have this user who is over here looking at his screen. And previously, the user accessed either the contract stored system together with ECM, or they just went into ECM. Depending on how an organization has deployed the management and the access, we still have a user sitting out here who's remotely connecting to accessing these documents. And sometimes those user interfaces are native. In the case of the contracting system, those user interfaces can be native to the actual contract system. However, when we look at our new workflow, we're going to connect this user to our hub. And we're going to do it conversationally. That's where, if you consider the conversational aspect of what previously was probably a serial workflow of moving documents through a process, now in this new agentic type architecture, we use a chat or what we would call an agent of agents to leverage all the skills we have in the hub to accomplish our contract use cases. Now, there are multiple contract use cases. Many of them kind of circulate around confirming terms and conditions, looking at dates as they become effective and expire. But a lot of that work can be done interrogatively through chat. For example, you can type in, what's the difference between the 2023 force majeure clause and what's we have in the 2024 force majeure clause? And what will happen in that scenario, so when we have a question, what happens first is step one, we retrieve the relevant content from the vector store. Now, keep in mind, the original contracts are still in the record system. We haven't changed that. What we're doing is we're accessing the content that we've indexed into the vector store. Remember, our model is helping us get to that content much faster because we're identifying things that are in a contract, such as parties involved, terms and conditions. So we're searching, including those types of elements in our metadata. Okay, now, once we retrieve that relevant content for the question, the second thing we do is we provide the AI. In this case, we could say, LLM, because we're doing text, we would provide that content to our large language model, and then a set of instructions giving the AI a purpose for the inquiry. Compare these two clauses. Provide guidance or information on what is missing when comparing one or the other. A lot of times in contracts, we really just need to understand what's changing in addition to what we're on the hook for. So we can ask multiple questions, and what the AI will do is we'll take, this is what you might see as a retrieval augmented generation scenario that is quite popular, otherwise known as RAG. But what the instruction is doing is we're leveraging our hub, and we're taking the information that we get from the LLM, and we can now, with our hub, evaluate for business rules. We'll call this BR. Now, our business rules, that could be something that helps the subject matter expert determine the best course of action, because inside our business rules, we have thresholds and conditions that really are strategic and can inform the user rather than having the user get information from the contract, because today this is what they have to do. They have to go to the contract system, they have to open up the contract, then they have to read it and digest it. Then they either have to reference the business rules separately in a different system, or they have to pull some sort of expert in to supplement their expertise around the business rules in order to have the full context. But look at what we have here. We have a hub that's bringing all of this together. So in step 3, we can evaluate our business rules. What effects do we have? What important thresholds are, present in the context of our query? And then once that's done, there could be yet another step for generating communications. And what we'll do is we'll call this other. Because other would encapsulate any other type of function that may or may not be applicable to this process. And once we're exhaustively complete on touching all the necessary systems, keep in mind, the hub is now doing all the integrating. It's leveraging the AI. It's leveraging our content, which is our truth system of record. It's leveraging applicable business rules and other systems and keeping it conversational and interactive with the user. So what does this mean? This means that the user has less complexity, has less friction, less cost of time, because the AI, and the LLM in this case, is providing summaries, fact extraction, as well as comparison, and all the things that they would have to do, this user would have to do themselves with their own cognitive ability. Now they're getting assisted by the AI, orchestrated by our hub, and the hub brings in all the other services. Could be that we need to send an email, could be that we need to pull in other documents as it relates to our particular agreement. Maybe there is a record in Salesforce or our ERP or CRM system that is necessary to establish the full context. That's where other comes in. So all of this is triggered by this one user conversationally, saying, I need to process or I need to investigate this year's agreement or last year's agreement, or I need to access the agreement, the lease agreement for this property. All of these types of things are just conversational and can trigger a multitude of actions simultaneously, by the way, for our user to bring the full context to their screen. Now, what does this do? As I mentioned before, this essentially saves time. Okay? Saving time means that we have less friction, we have greater efficiency, and I mean, in this particular scenario, it's more natural because the user is not having to learn or adapt. I mean, keep in mind, this user doesn't stay the same. There's obviously career churn that this population of users, the folks that deal with these contracts and documents, they can move on to other areas of the business. And then we have a new person, and what this new person has to do today without the benefit of this orchestration is have to really learn and apprentice under somebody who knows and has been doing this. But this new architecture and new approach not only saves time, but accelerates value. Because this person can be a new person, or they can be a seasoned person and still have access to the same orchestration of events. And with the AI model tuned for this particular organization's content, they can get trusted results. And last but certainly not least, we can scale. Many organizations have trouble in complex documents when they approach scale, because the only way they can scale is to actually add people, because it's really through the subject matter expert that this content is evaluated and adjudicated. But if we're able to let the AI help us along with our orchestration hub, then all of a sudden we're moving faster. We can have stronger value sooner, and that will allow us to do more in a shorter amount of time. So, in summary, contract automation is the addition of an orchestration hub that leverages key systems such as business rules, your existing investments like your ERP and CRM system, as well as AI, both traditional and generative, all for the complex but yet simplistic to the user purpose of processing these complex documents.